Call of the mild. I like to think of American Impressionism as being mild rather than wild. And first we're going to actually go to France. This was the third Impressionist show in Paris in 1877. And young Julian Alden Weir was born in West Point, New York, by the way, where his father taught art at the military academy there. So Weir was in Paris studying with the arch academic painter Jean-Léon Gérôme, and he saw this show. He called it the Impressionist show. And he wrote to his parents on April 15th, 1877. He said, "I never in my life saw such horrible things." And these two paintings were in the show. So he goes on, "They do not observe drawing, nor form, but give you an impression of what they call nature. It was worse than a chamber of horrors." "I was there for about a quarter of an hour and left with a headache," he says. "1 franc to get in." He's really indignant about that. "I was mad for 2 or 3 days, not only having paid the money, but for the demoralizing effect it must have on many." Well, American art and French painting really were pretty far apart, and you can get a sense of it looking at this comparison. The painting by Thomas Eakins actually was done a year after the painting by Seurat. And this kind of suggests the gap, between advanced Impressionism and post-Impressionism in the case of Seurat, and American conservative academic practice. Eakins is swimming is a painting in which he's trying to get everything exactly right. The anatomy, the drawing, the perspective. He even would do things like mechanically calculate just exactly the right way to get those ripples in the water. He wanted to get it all right. And the tonality is very dark, the colors are quite dark. And he even used photographs. He had many photographs of the site and many photographs of the models, just so he could put it all together in the most exactly perfect, true to nature way as possible. And you've got Seurat, who was actually in a lot of ways just as systematic as Eakins, but he's looking for something very, very different. You might notice there's no detail in this painting at all. The forms are very large, they're kind of abstracted, they're very still. And what Seurat was trying to do was to study color and light in a scientifically precise way, which was based on optical theories of color relations. And yet, it looks so different from Eakins. It's full of color, it's bright, it's very simple, there's no detail. So there's almost nothing these paintings have in common, except they both have water and bathers in them. So Americans had a lot of catching up to do if they were going to be Impressionist painters, which of course many of them would be within a very short time. So Seurat's painting was exhibited actually in New York in 1886 at the big show Works in Oil and Pastel by the Impressionists of Paris, which was brought to New York by the art dealer Paul Durand-Ruel, who had been a real proponent of the Impressionists. And there were several hundred works in the show, 300, 400, something like that. And unexpectedly, although it was controversial, it was a pretty big commercial success. Durand-Ruel actually sold 50 paintings right off the bat out of the show. American collectors really liked this work. And in fact, it's so successful that Durand-Ruel went on to open his own gallery in New York a couple of years later. So the market was really good, and you can hardly overestimate Durand-Ruel's influence in legitimizing Impressionism as well as marketing it. He played a huge role in this. And by the way, some of you might know that there's a big show that actually explores Durand-Ruel's influence, his involvement with Impressionism, which was at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. I'm not sure if it's still there, but it's, he's getting belated credit, I suppose, for his role as the chief impressionist entrepreneur. So here are some of the paintings that were in the 1886 show, some of them. So at the time, it was controversial. Critics were sharply divided. And some of them actually just couldn't stand this stuff. They were just like J. Alden Lear in 1877. They hated it. They didn't understand it. They called Impressionists extremist. This was extremist art. Their paintings were incomprehensible polychromatic daubs. And if they weren't that, they were masses of daubs. They were crude. They were childish. They were like tomato and mayonnaise salads, scattered with chopped up glued-on hard-boiled egg whites. And whoever saw such purple tints in nature? And worst of all, that purple, one critic remarked, was pernicious. It was infecting susceptible young Americans who were now coming down with purple mania. One critic, in fact, even claimed that he had consulted an oculist to find out if there was such a malady as purple eye. So they heaped abuse on these paintings. And yet other critics loved the show. So there was really just as much positive criticism as there was negative. More people write about the negative criticism, but many others praised the work. In particular, a very respected older critic, Clarence Cook, who absolutely adored the work. He wrote about their brilliant colors, their delicate atmospheric effects, their sense of life and truth, and the exhilarating delight they made him feel. So he talked about Alfred Sisley. He said that there was a solid charm about him. He loved the Gare Saint-Lazare paintings by Monet because they were so full of life and contrasted effects. And Renoir's On the Terrace, he wrote about talking of, in the painting of the lady with the little child, brilliant colors against a network of delightfully suggested landscape gave him such pleasure. So he's just in heaven in this show. But he saved his highest praise for Claude Monet, saying, he makes every other painter of water look like an apprentice. And if Mr. Durand Ruel had done nothing more than bring us the pictures of this artist, he would have rendered us a great service. So pro or con, Impressionism was on the rise. And following this show, which was a real sort of pivotal show for many, especially the younger artists, more and more young Americans would begin to experiment with Impressionism, including Mr. Chamber of Horrors. He had just been horrified when he fled the 1877 show, and the painting on the left gives you an idea of what he was doing, just like his teacher, Gérôme, a very slick finish. Everything is very clear, great attention to detail and posing, and that kind of licked surface that academic painters strove to get. And look what he's doing in 1892. He's totally up there in Impressionist land. So you might say he has become a permanent resident of the Chamber of Horrors. So we might ask, well, why did so many so quickly convert to Impressionism? When they were painters, most of them were born in the 1850s. Most of them had academic training, but they see Impressionism and they get so excited because it's modern. And it's also saleable, and that's really important because American artists always struggle to sell their work. And before Impressionism, rich people in New York and Chicago were buying academic work like Gérôme's and others. So they wanted a piece of the market. But the big question is, and that's what this talk is going to kind of explore a little bit, and many, many scholars have worried this bone, are American Impressionist works clones of the French, as many have claimed, or do they have an American accent? So let's look at these poppy fields. Pictures of poppies. How different can you get if you're an impressionist painting poppies? One French, two American. What do they have in common? I think you can all see the high horizon line, which so often characterizes impressionist composition. Very rapid looking technique, sketchy broken brush strokes, painted in the open air. Light-filled atmosphere, transparent shadows, and this wonderful, brilliant color, a buoyant mood. They're just really cheerful looking, all three of them. What sets them apart? Not much. And then, of course, there's the Monet factor, and that's what the exhibition upstairs explores in great detail. Americans love Monet, just the way they do today, I guess. And many, many of them flocked to Giverny to be closer to Monet, and quite a number of them actually settled in Giverny or spent a great deal of time there. Theodore Robinson, who painted this landscape, was born in Vermont, raised in Wisconsin, trained in Paris, with Jérôme, again, Weir's teacher. But he became a full-time follower of Monet, and they actually became very, very close friends. Lilla Cabot Perry was a Boston Brahmin who spent 9 summers in Giverny, and she got Monet to give her lots of tips about how to paint, how to see. And that famous, much published account that she gives of how he would sort of set her easel down, or she'd set the easel down looking at some motif, and he'd say, don't think about what it is, just think about the colors. And there's a little square of pink, there's a little lot of yellow, etc., etc. And Theodore Butler, who was a native of Columbus, Ohio, and also trained in Paris, he was so close to Monet that he ended up marrying one of Monet's stepdaughters. And he lived in Giverny for a very long time, although eventually he did return to the United States. So the paintings you see here, they're somewhat different stylistically, but they're all still very much indebted to the master. As the Art Amateur, one of the contemporary late 19th century journals, put it, they have got the blue-green color of Monet's Impressionism and got it bad. And how about those purple shadows? So again, we can ask, is American Impressionism American at all, whatever that means? And I think what we can say here is that they are French Impressionist style paintings of French subjects done by American-born artists. So can we get any further than that? Well, let's come back to the USA. What happens when American Impressionists actually turn their gaze to American subjects? Do things change? So here again is J. Alden Weir. The subject here is the Willimantic Linen Mills in Willimantic, New Hampshire. And right off the bat, it's kind of interesting to notice that what he's calling this painting is a factory village. Makes it seem kind of nice and cozy. And how does he want us to think about this place? It's a really beautiful picture. And it's bright, it's sunny, it's colorful, it's breezy. It's done with sketchy strokes, although there's a little bit more of a tendency to outline things than Monet might do. Look at those Monet-style reflections in the water and the tranquil blue sky, so it's a very peaceful, lovely, inviting scene. But, well, there is that factory. What's that doing there? Why would he paint it anyway? well, but he's painting it in a particular way. He's distancing it. It's not in your face. It's screened by all this lovely brush and forest. And it's not disruptive. What Weir seems to be trying to do here is to create a reassuring vision of harmony between nature and industry, blending them together, balancing them out. The factory's not bad, it just sort of fits right into this village. And notice there are some interesting details, like how the smoke from the chimney, this pollution is just sort of turning into the clouds in the sky, it rhymes with the clouds. And you might not notice at first, but there are actually telegraph poles in the picture too. One here and one over here, but they're just sort of growing there like the trees they used to be. So nothing is so bad about this factory landscape. It hasn't done any harm to the village at all, probably. If you think about what Weir is doing, distancing the factory and making it look all harmonious, his take on the subject really isn't all that different from the earlier, older, typical Hudson River School painter like Jasper Cropsey, whose Stark Viaduct you see here. This wilderness and rugged mountains, it just looks so glorious, American, beautiful, but eventually you look at it and you see that, oh, there's a train. And it's chugging along on this magnificent marvel of American engineering, this great viaduct that just sort of smoothly follows the curve of the mountain. It's way off in the distance, just like the factory. It blends right in. And it's interesting, he uses the same trick with the smoke from the train's funnel. See, it's just all white and puffy, and it's just going to go up in the sky and float there with the clouds, no pollution, no noise. It's part of American nature. So we have to ask, what's he leaving out anyway? Well, he's fudging a lot, as anyone who's ever been in a textile factory knows. Basically, he was completely ignoring the dark side of American industry and its effects, which were leisure. So in the contemporary photograph you see here, the mill totally dominates and controls the landscape. It is in your face. The river has been harnessed to power balloons and spinning machines. Inside, see those belts on the ceiling? Once those belts were engaged for the workday, they didn't stop. They didn't slow down. And these poor people who were tending the spinning and the spooling of the linen thread, they just have to rush to keep up with it. So unlike traditional villagers who might be happy harvesters, these people are really quite literally slaves to the machine. But we don't see any of that in Weir's painting. It's not a painting about moralizing or deploring the labor difficulties and low wages and all the other significant difficulties that were faced by American factory workers. It's just this optimistic vision of the machine in the garden. That's like a real ideal of the 19th century America. Let's have the garden, which is the American Eden, but let's put machines in it. But let's make sure that they don't fight with each other. They all blend in, and one becomes part of the other. So in that sense, Weir's painting exemplifies what the art historian Kathleen Pine has argued regarding American Impressionism, and I think it's a pretty good formula. She has written that it's stylistically progressive. It's very modern in that regard. But by and large, it's quite thematically conservative. So let's think about the bigger picture here, too. What's the larger context? Why the stress on harmony rather than the excitement of modernity, for example, which is what Monet was all about in those paintings of the Gare Saint-Lazare. He was thrilled. But you don't see a whole lot of in-your-face trains in American Impressionism, if any. Well, Many people at the time believed that machine-driven urban life was becoming increasingly chaotic, cacophonous, and really damaging to health and sanity. Everything was too fast, too nerve-wracking, too unnatural. It was a life in high tension, as the caption of that photograph notes, anxiety and stress. And you know that this photograph is from a very interesting book by a doctor on worry and nervousness. And this was published in 1914, so it's sort of after the paintings we're looking at. But American nervousness had actually been a hot topic for decades. George Beard, who was an American doctor, published a hugely influential book, American Nervousness, in 1870. And he deplored the furious pace of modern life, which he claimed was causing nervous disease and nervous collapse, neurasthenia, it was called. And he identified this whole syndrome as a particularly American disease. So nervousness comes to be thought of as the American disease. Americans are nervous. Now, factory workers were not nervous. Lower-class people were not nervous. It was mainly sensitive middle-class and cultured upper-class people who were nervous. And it afflicted people who worked with their brains. And women, above all, and we'll get back to that a little bit later. So, what with all this nervousness about nervousness, nativized Impressionism stepped in to provide therapy, taking the edge off modern life, softening up the modern urban landscape.